Indoor climate is one of those things you only notice when things get unpleasant. Heat in the summer, cold in the winter, and so on. Today we will discuss what we can do about it and why indoor climate is an important topic all year round. Welcome to the Soft Skill channel. My name is Sebastian Jung and today I'd like to discuss indoor climate. We record this video end of July. It's quite hot, so we will start with one of the most obvious aspects, which is temperature. Temperature is basically simple. It shouldn't be too low or too high. What is considered the ideal temperature differs depending on gender. On average, males like it a bit cooler, while women like it a bit warmer. The difference is about 2 to 3 degrees Celsius or about 5 to 6 degrees Fahrenheit. However, your personal favorite temperature is of course quite individual, so it might differ from the gender default. For the proper temperature at your workplace, there might be regulations in your country. This is, of course, different depending on countries. In Germany, there are some rules for workplace temperature. But what can we do about the temperature in our homes? What can we do if it is too hot in summer? Of course, you are lucky if your home has air conditioning, because that is, with that it is quite easy to get a comfortable temperature. However, in several countries this is not so common. For example, in Germany, where I live, most homes don't have air conditioning. So our means are somewhat limited, because without air conditioning it's not possible to actually decrease the temperature. And the temperature will, quite on the opposite, increase throughout the day due to sunlight, sun heat, due to our own body temperatures, and due to the heat that is generated by electrical appliances. So, only thing we can do, best strategy, is to open all the windows in the early morning when the outside temperature is lowest, and open them as long as possible. Our goal is not just to exchange all the air in our home to get cool air into the apartment, house or whatever, but it is also to allow the walls, the furniture and everything that is in our home to cool down, because walls and everything can store the heat and will later emit the heat to our air. And we don't want that, so we want to cool down everything as much as possible. And then throughout the day we want to increase temperature as little as possible, so don't use any electrical devices that you don't really need, and we want to keep the heat outside. Now, this is a bit difficult, because once sunlight has passed through your windows, there's pretty little you can do. You have pretty much already lost. So having blinds on the inside, curtains, whatever, is quite ineffective. However, having blinds or something like that on the outside is quite effective, helps a lot to keep out the heat. What also helps a lot is having special temperature protection, heat protection windows. However, all of that is costly to install, and it's also difficult if you are living on rent. For heat protection windows, there is kind of a low-grade version which is heat protection foil that can be applied to the outside of your windows. However, it has to be applied by a specialist, so it isn't that cheap either, and it's way less effective than proper heat protection windows. Another thing that can help is some greenery, such as a tree in front of your window that will keep sunlight and heat away. However, again, it's difficult to do if you're living for rent. There are also some strategies you can use to enable your body to better deal with the heat, to better cope with the heat. They are a bit counterintuitive because the first is avoid cold drinks. But they are so refreshing. It's so nice to have a cold drink in summer. However, the disadvantage is once you have the cool liquid in your stomach, your body will notice the temperature difference and will say, wait, body temperature is supposed to be higher, and your body will generate heat to counter the cool liquid in your stomach. And the last thing you want in summer is your body producing heat, so it is better to have drinks that have room temperature. And another thing that might sound strange at first is to eat spicy food. Now think about it, all the countries that are famous for a spicy cuisine, they are close to the equator, they are in hot regions like Mexico, South America, Africa, Southeast Asia, India, and so on. The cool countries like Siberia, Greenland, Iceland, they are not famous for spicy food. And the reason is that spicy food increases blood circulation in our body, and that helps our body to better emit heat, to get rid of excess heat, so it gives us a bit of relief in the summer. Another thing that can provide some relief is a simple fan. Now obviously it doesn't really cool down anything, quite contrary, it actually produces heat because it's an electrical device that will produce some heat during use. However, the airflow gives some relief, makes us more comfortable in the heat. Now obviously things are way easier in winter because even in Germany we have heating in all our homes, even if we have no air conditioning, so it is rather simple to heat our homes in winter. Most important thing here is to make sure not to waste energy. For example, what you should never do is having the heating running and at the same time having the windows slightly open over a long period of time. This will excessively waste energy. If you are heating your home during winter, you should always only open the windows for short periods at a time to quickly exchange as much air as possible. Open all the windows at once for a few minutes and then close them again so you don't waste any warmth, any energy, or as little as possible at least. Now, apart from temperature, humidity is another quite important factor that determines indoor climate. It's not as obvious as temperature, but it makes a lot of difference. Now, this is quite obvious if you consider a sauna. In Germany, if you visit a typical sauna, you have a couple of sauna rooms that have high temperature, like 85 to 100 degrees Celsius. But they have low humidity. And you usually have a steam bath. And the steam bath only has a temperature of about 40 degrees Celsius, but it has 100% humidity. Either of them you can bear for about 15 minutes. So humidity really makes a lot of difference. High heat and high humidity is way more difficult to stand, way more difficult to bear than heat with a low humidity. And this is also the reason why a rain shower on a very hot day often doesn't bring us relief, but makes the climate even worse, because after the rain shower we not only have the high heat, but we also have high humidity. And here there is a nasty trap, because there are some tricks, some life hacks, and also some cheap air cooling devices that rely on cooling by evaporation. When water evaporates, it draws heat from its surroundings, so it gets slightly cooler. This is the reason why it is more comfortable in summer at a lake than somewhere else in the countryside. Now, obviously, if water evaporates, it also increases humidity, which is what we don't want. So classic tricks like placing a wet towel somewhere and having the fan blow against it. This might give a very short relief, but then the climate will be even worse than before. And the same goes for cheap cooling devices that consist of a water tank and a fan. They will do more harm than good if they have any noticeable effect at all. So we should avoid that. A proper air conditioning unit, by the way, actually decreases humidity, which is a big part of the noticeable effect you feel when the air conditioning is running. This is why it quickly feels more comfortable, not so much due to the slight decrease in temperature, but primarily because of the decrease in humidity. Now, humidity has some other interesting aspects. Humidity works in a certain way because warm air can store more water, more humidity than cool air. Humidity is usually measured in relative humidity, so cool air that has a relative humidity of 40% contains less water than hot air with the same relative humidity of 40%. And this is important because if hot, moist air cools down, it will reach a certain point called the dew point, where it can no longer hold all the water or the humidity and will emit it to the surroundings. This is a phenomenon you can observe in your bathroom in the morning if you've taken a shower and your mirror, for example, is fogged over, or also your window. This occurs because the warm, hot air cools down on that cool surface of the mirror, and therefore it loses water and your mirror gets wet. And this can be a problematic phenomenon if you have high humidity in your home and you have, for example, some sections of wall that are cooler than the surroundings, because those sections might get wet and the wet wall might develop mold. Mold might grow on that wall, and of course that is highly problematic and undesirable. So we need to make sure that humidity doesn't get too high. Now, what can we do about it? Again, you are in luck if you have air conditioning, because as I said, air conditioning will decrease humidity. Apart from that, we don't have any ways of actually decreasing humidity. All we can do is make sure that it doesn't increase too much. Now, as I said, we should avoid tricks and cooling devices that rely on cooling by evaporation. And we should also make sure that humidity from the bathroom or from the kitchen doesn't get into the other rooms. So, for example, when we take a shower, we should keep the bathroom door closed. And afterwards, we should first open the window, get the humidity out before we open the door, so the humidity doesn't get into the other rooms. And the same is true for the kitchen. If there is humidity due to cooking, because we had water cooking and so on, again, we should make sure to get this out through the window and not to get this humidity into the rest of our homes. Again, a fan can offer a bit of relief, because in rooms that have a lot of people, due to transpiration, the humidity will rise, and a fan can provide some circulation throughout your home, so humidity is distributed evenly across the different rooms, and in that room where the people are, it doesn't get unpleasant as quickly. So a fan can again be helpful here. Now, in winter, we pretty much have the opposite problem because we often suffer from dry air. And the reason is again this fact that hot air can hold more water than cool air. Now, at first, we have in our home cool air that has perfectly fine humidity. Now, since it is cool, we turn up the heating, we heat up that air, temperature increases. It doesn't get additional humidity, obviously, so since warm air is capable of holding more air, relative humidity actually decreases. So we get hot air that is warm air that is rather dry. And this causes our lips and our hands to become dry, and it also dries out our mucous membranes, for example, in our noses. And those membranes protect us from infections. And if they are dry, if they dry out, this won't work anymore. And this is one of the main reasons why more people get sick, why more people catch a cold during winter, because the dry, heated air dries out the mucous membranes. The other main reason why more people get sick in winter, by the way, is that indoor spaces are more crowded. People don't go outside as much. So we have more chances to infect each other. This is the other main reason. What doesn't contribute to the fact that people catch a cold and get sick in winter is the low temperature, by the way. Even though it's called a cold, it isn't actually caused by cold weather. This is an ancient misconception. So, what can we do about the dry air? There are special devices that can increase humidity, humidifiers, and there are also classic tricks like placing a wet towel on your heater or placing a bowl of water in the room. And they are basically fine, but you have to be careful because a wet towel or a bowl of water is a great playground for germs. It's basically like a petri dish. So you should make sure to regularly exchange the water, replace the towel, so you don't actually increase the risk of an infection instead of decreasing it, as this would be highly undesirable. Finally, there is another factor to indoor climate that is also often overlooked, but that is also quite important, and that is air quality. Air quality, by the way, is determined not so much by oxygen, but by carbon dioxide. Low quality air doesn't lack oxygen, but it contains too much carbon dioxide. Too much carbon dioxide in the air reduces our well-being. For example, I've known several people who get a headache after a while if the air quality is low, and low air quality also presumably reduces our productivity, especially our ability to concentrate. Now, there is a trap here, because if we reach the point where we say, oh, it's quite sticky in here and a bit smelly, and I should probably better open the windows, it is pretty much already too late, because we've already been sitting in low quality air probably for several hours. So we need to be proactive here. We need to open the windows at regular intervals to make sure that we maintain decent air quality. Now you might probably say, wait, earlier when we discussed temperature, you said open the windows in the morning and then keep them closed throughout the day. Now this is correct. This is quite an unpleasant situation that you might encounter in summer, where inside it is unpleasantly hot and the air quality is clearly decreasing, but if you open the window, the air outside is even hotter, so you really have to choose one of two unpleasantries. There is not such a good way out of that. The only thing that can help a bit is once again a fan, due to air circulation. In rooms that have a lot of people, carbon dioxide will quickly rise due to the carbon dioxide we emit when we breathe out. And if a fan provides some air circulation between the different rooms, that carbon dioxide will be distributed throughout the rooms, and the concentration in the room where the people are will be kept lower for a longer time. Finally, one topic I'd like to mention briefly in regard to indoor climate are plants. Because plants improve air quality. They produce oxygen, they filter pollutants, and they regulate moisture. However, this effect is rather small and usually negligible. Now, it should be common sense. If you have a home that has plenty of cubic meters of air, and you have one or two plants that are this size, then it's quite obvious that they don't have a chance to really do anything about the air quality, because it's way too much air for way too few, too small plants. So if you buy plants for your home, air quality shouldn't be your main motivation. If you buy plants because you like how they look, and maybe you like gardening or some other reason, then a slight increase in air quality is a nice bonus. However, it's not worth the costs and effort to get them just for that. Now, one interesting tip you might sometimes read is that you should not place too many plants in your bedroom. Now, this advice is given because plants produce carbon dioxide at night. This is something that often surprises people. They say, wait, plants produce oxygen, I know for sure, but it's actually quite simple. Pretty much like ourselves, plants have a kind of respiration where they consume oxygen and they produce carbon dioxide. And this happens permanently throughout the entire day. And plants have this process called photosynthesis that you probably know, which is pretty much the metabolism of plants, where they consume carbon dioxide and they produce oxygen. And this process requires sunlight, so it only happens during the day. During the night, however, plants will only produce carbon dioxide, so they will actually decrease the air quality, and that's why you sometimes the advice not to have too many plants in the bedroom. However, again, the effect is not that great. If your bedroom isn't a real jungle, you won't get any problems. 2 or 3 small plants in your bedroom really are no cause for concern. Now, that wasn't such a spectacular topic today, but I hope there was some information that you didn't already know, that was interesting to you, and that maybe is helpful for you in your day-to-day lives. If this is the case, I would be happy if you like the video and maybe subscribe to the channel. We will see each other again next week with another interesting topic. For today, I'll take my leave. Have a nice day. See you next time.